A messy week for the government, a manhunt here, and more than a maybe from across the pond. The search for sex offender Hadush Kibatu, released by mistake, goes on. And in an exclusive interview, Kamala Harris tells us she might run again for the White House.
I am not done. I have lived my entire career a life of service, and it's in my bones.
And she appears to regret that she didn't ask Joe Biden to pull out of the race.
I do reflect on whether I should have had a conversation with him, urging him not to run for re-election.
And with us live in the studio this morning, the Health Secretary Wes Streeting and Chris Philp, the Conservatives' Shadow Home Secretary. So it appears Kamala Harris fancies a comeback. Would that be a good thing, Wes?
Oh, that's for the Democratic Party to decide. No too well than to interfere in politics in another country.
Oh, that's very diplomatic. But comebacks are a thing in politics. I mean, Donald Trump had a huge comeback. What about his friend Boris Johnson making a comeback to save the Tory party?
Well, I think Boris is very happy writing his column in the Mail, and we're definitely looking forward to the future.
OK. Well, you're
with energy and optimism.
You're both being very energetic, optimistic and diplomatic this morning. We'll speak to you both later on in the programme. Throughout the show this morning, as it happens, we have Marina Wheeler, renowned barrister, writer and ex-wife of Boris Johnson, alongside news queen Kay Barley and the New York Times' Mike Shear. Morning. Let's start, as we always do, with what's making the news. And it's a bit of a pick and mix on the headlines today. More on Prince Andrew on the front of the Sunday Times, and our guest Wes Streeting warning the Prime Minister is having a Hartlepool moment. When things were so bad, he thought about quitting. The Sunday Telegraph splashes on suggestions Labour should water down its plans for workers' rights. The Mail on Sunday is looking ahead to the budget and predicting a mansion tax. There are warnings of a winter crisis in the NHS on the front of the Independent on Sunday. And here at the BBC, we're leading with a continuing hunt for the convicted sex offender. Well, a warm welcome to our panel this morning. Great to have the three of you with us this morning. Kay, Labour have been having a very hard time of late, but this manhunt... well, this manhunt seems to be the kind of story. It's very serious, but from a political point of view, you think you couldn't make it up.
I know, not really the government's fault, it has to be said. Hadush Kibatu he's been on the run now for 3 days. When he was released from prison, he said, "Where am I going? What am I doing?" He was completely discombobulated, didn't know what was going on, was outside the prison for about an hour, and then the prison guards actually directed him to the station. Now, I don't have any sympathy for him. He's a convicted sex offender, not least against a young girl, but there has to be some concern about him being confused and disorientated, and nobody knowing. Last seen, I think, in your part of the woods?
In Hackney.
In Hackney, in East London. I mean, Marina, you're a barrister, mediator, very familiar with the courts.
Yes.
We hear often that the justice system is in chaos at the moment. I mean, is that your experience?
I think it is in terrible disarray. I think that's been a long time building up, and I think it would probably be disingenuous for a political party to blame it on this current government. But yeah, and in this, escape or release in error is a terrible, terrible mistake. But we've got to find out what exactly went wrong. Because it does happen. I think there were hundreds last year, and we're really hearing about this one because of who it is.
That's absolutely right. I mean, the numbers had gone up. They were 100 or something last year, but more than 200 in the last 12 months to March. So it does seem to be a more common occurrence. But Mike, you're quite a new arrival to working here in the UK after very years distinguished reporting in the US, so welcome. I just wonder, as an outsider, looking at this government and these different mishaps, some which they may not be responsible for, some which they are, and a huge by-election defeat this week, for example. Right. What's your impression of them?
I mean, I think so much of political success, certainly in the United States, and my sense is here as well, hinges on this idea that government actually works and that people have faith and trust in institutions, whatever institutions those may be. And I think that this manhunt for this released criminal, I agree with all of the things that have been said, but I think at some level it kind of it kind of reasserts this idea that Nigel Farage uses a lot, that Britain is broken, right? And that's a powerful message, and people act on that when they choose their leader.
And certainly in private, many people in government would often say that's their biggest challenge, is showing people actually that government can work. We'll be back with the three of you a bit later in the show, because exactly along those lines, it wasn't that long ago that the Prime Minister promised us all a marvellous phase 2 after a lot of stumbles in phase 1. He shuffled his ministers and his team in number 10 to get cracking, but the list of mishaps is getting longer. Migration plans descended into farce this week when one of those sent out came back in. Labour was hammered in a by-election in Wales, where you can see them cheering there. Plaid Cymru won very, very convincingly indeed. And the prison service, as we've been discussing, managed to lose the sex offender Hadush Kabatu. There he is, spotted on CCTV in an East London library. Well, Wes Streeting, let's talk to you about all of this. First of all, on Hadush Kabatu, what can you tell us is happening right now? Is there any new information?
Well, there's an enormous police manhunt underway. He was last spotted in East London, as you just said. So we're urging vigilance for people to keep their eyes open if they see him, to dial 999 so that he can be arrested and deported. But there's no skirting over the fact that this is an utterly appalling situation. I think most people, like me, will feel completely horrified that something like this could happen, let alone that it has happened. And that's why the Justice Secretary has ordered an investigation so that we can get to the bottom of how on earth did this happen, what went wrong, who was responsible, what do we do differently, and who needs to be held to account.
And as things stand, can you give us answers to any of those questions?
Well, that investigation the Justice Secretary has ordered, we will look at that and obviously be upfront with the public and with Parliament, because I think, anyone watching this morning will beg a belief that something like this could happen. And I suspect if someone came to the BBC with a script proposal for this sort of scenario, it would be dismissed for being too far-fetched.
When you look, though, at the numbers, this is a particularly prominent offender, given that the crime he committed was the source of so much upset that led to a summer of unrest over asylum hotels. But if you look at the figures, 262 prisoners were released by mistake in the last year in England and Wales. That's more than double the previous year. Why is it getting worse?
This has been a long-running problem,
but it's getting worse on your watch.
I don't accept that these things just happen. We're talking about the management of people who are behind bars, and by definition, for serious offences. And so to mismanage the situation in this way is totally unacceptable. I accept the prison service is under enormous pressure. When we came in, our prisons were bursting at the seams, and one of the first things we had to do as a government is something no government should have to do, which is to contemplate early release of some prisoners, because otherwise the police can arrest people. So that's the scale of the challenge. But even against that backdrop, it doesn't explain or excuse the release of people onto our streets who have no business being there.
So there's clear mismanagement in the prison service, as you've said. What about in other bits of government? In your department, waiting lists in England have gone up 3 months in a row. That's not what you promised people, is it?
Well, progress is stalled in the last few months for a couple of reasons. Firstly, we had industrial action by resident doctors. That had an impact and set us back, as I feared it would and said it would at the time. We've also seen demand outstripping growth in activity. I say that not by way of excuse, by the way, but explanation. We've got to make sure that we outstrip demand. I think you'll begin to see improvement again on waiting lists in the coming months.
So by when will they start to come down? Because they have been going up.
By the end of this Parliament, and on current trajectories, by the end of this Parliament, we can still achieve our goal of cutting waiting times from 18 months, which we inherited, to 18 weeks, which is where they should always have been. And notwithstanding the challenges of the last few months, this is the first time in years that waiting lists have fallen in England. Wales, they are also falling too. The SNP in Scotland have got some questions to answer about how their waiting lists have gone up.
And we'll do that when they speak to them. But let's look at a different measure.
But we are moving in the right direction.
But let's look at a different measure there, where it's not moving in the right direction. You promised to sort out people being treated in corridors. So patients waiting for more than 12 hours on a trolley, or sometimes even, on a visitor's plastic chair in a corridor. The numbers have gone up since last year. And the Royal College of Nurses, Nicola Ranger, who you'll be very familiar with, she told us the government must own this issue and stop putting patients at harm. And when you spoke about this in January, a long time ago now, you said you'll never accept or tolerate it. And yet more people are waiting more than 12 hours stuck in a trolley in a hospital. When are you going to fix that?
We will also be publishing transparently the corridor care numbers so that I can be held to account and hold the system.
Well, we've got the numbers here.
6,000
more people are on that, having that problem.
As I said back in January, I think, when I was on, the problems that we see in winter in the NHS are not those that can be solved overnight and are not going to be solved in the first year of a Labour government. What I do want to see is year-on-year improvement. Our urgent and emergency care plan will be putting an extra £450 million into our urgent emergency care services, which will include the provision of 500 new and upgraded ambulances, as well as investment in urgent emergency care itself.
And no one thinks, Wes Streeting, that you have a magic wand and you could have sorted everything out in a year. But you've been in power for a year and a half. We're not even into the winter yet, which is always challenging for the NHS. And these numbers are going in the wrong direction. It's not even just that it's about the same or it's coming down more slowly. They're going in the wrong direction.
There are green shoots of recovery as well. So we promised to deliver 2 million more. We promised to deliver 2 million more appointments in our first year of Labour government. We actually delivered 5 million. We promised 1,000 more GPs. We've actually delivered 2,500. Patient satisfaction with general practice has risen. And, you know, we make no bones about the fact that despite that, there'll be people watching this morning who will be shouting at the telly at this point saying, but hang on a minute, I couldn't get a GP appointment or I'm still on a waiting list. Yeah. I know that. I accept that. I won't tolerate that. We're going as fast as we can, and we'll be going faster, crucially. So on waiting lists, for example, we've turned the tide in our first year. That sets us up to go even faster in terms of our activity in the coming years to hit that 18-week target.
And one of the problems that you've got coming up, which I know you need like a hole in the head, is another doctor's strike. Now, you said the difference a Labour government would make is having no doctor strikes. As things stand, the BMA's resident doctors, used to be called junior doctors, they're planning to go on strike again. How are you going to stop that happening?
Well, there is a deal available to be done that would deliver for resident doctors right now, as many of them are applying for specialty training places and are deeply concerned that there aren't enough places available. We can right now increase the number of places available, as well as helping with things like, you know, exam fees and other things that resident doctors experience. But I can't do that if I'm spending £250 million meeting the costs of strikes. So there are choices and trade-offs here. There are always choices and trade-offs across the NHS.
But how are you going to stop the strike
happening? And so the message I've got for the BMA today is you can call off these strikes, get round the table and win for your members right now on jobs, or you can go out on strike, having had a 28.9% pay rise with little to no public support, putting more pressure on your colleagues in the NHS, inflicting more harm and delays to patients and setting back the progress we're making together on the NHS. And that's a scenario in which we all lose. If you get around the table and do a deal with us, there are more training places available for doctors right now as well as in the future. We can help with out-of-pocket expenses, and that will be a win-win scenario where together we motor ahead with the progress we're making in the NHS, and the BMA can say to their members, look, things are getting better in terms of your pay and your conditions. What we will not do, however, is be held to ransom. And what I will not do is allow those costs of strikes to be inflicted on other NHS staff who are working constructively with us or on patients in terms of the services that they receive.
And before we move on, talking of costs, you've got bigger drug prices and about £1 billion worth of redundancy payments for your decision to scrap NHS England. Whose chequebook is going to come out for that? Yours or Rachel Reeves?
On the changes we're making in terms of abolishing NHS England and reducing
who's going to pay for it?
Well, that will save hundreds of millions of pounds.
In the long term, but who's going to pay for the redundancy? You or the Treasury? And
in terms of additional costs, as you know, we are talking to the Treasury in the way that we normally do about how we meet these costs.
Okay, so
and the Chancellor, you're definitely not going to tempt me into speculation on the Chancellor's budget or what she should do, or any of the wild speculation we've seen in the newspapers in recent days.
And when Cabinet Ministers talk about speculation, I mean, I'm not going to tell you what conversations I'm having with my colleague. Let's talk about politics. When the government is losing prisoners and not being able to keep all the promises in the way that you want, you get punished by voters. This was the result in Caerphilly this week, an election for the Welsh Senedd. And I just want to show people here. These are the colour bars. Labour's tiny red bar miles behind Plaid Cymru, miles behind Reform UK. That is astonishing. 11%. You described that as a Hartlepool moment for Keir Starmer, referring to when he lost a by-election in 2021 and he thought about resigning. Why are things so bad? That's a shocking performance.
So I do think we need to react to this result in the way that we did Hartlepool, which is firstly to acknowledge the scale of the result and the message that voters have sent. The worst thing you can do after a result like this is pretend the voters were sending a different message, and you've got to take it on the chin. The second thing we've got to do is take it to heart. And in the aftermath of the Hartlepool by-election, which, similar to Caerphilly, was a place that supported Labour through thick and thin, and Caerphilly supported Labour for over a century, the way to respond to that is the way that Keir responded to Hartlepool.
What, think about resigning?
No, quite the opposite. No, thank goodness he didn't, by the way, because actually what he did was to say the Labour Party has not changed sufficiently and it's not changing fast enough. So he went more aggressively and went more boldly to reform the Labour Party so we could win a general election that no one thought he could win. Now we've got to do the same in the wake of Caerphilly.
What does that mean? Because those are rhetorical words. What does that mean? Because we've already heard from this still quite young government plenty of occasions where you've said, oh, we're going to listen and learn and do things differently. That's what happened after the welfare vote when you ditched those reforms. Well, that's what's happened after the winter fuel payment. What's actually going to be different?
Yeah, I think it's about having a bold and values-driven agenda. So on the NHS, for example, we set out only on Friday the most radical and ambitious plan for reform of the NHS in years. So over the next few years, we will get waiting times back to 18 weeks. We will make sure that people can get same-day emergency and urgent appointments. And we will also make sure that people can book all of their appointments online to bring the NHS into the 21st century. Now, in terms of the values that we bring to doing that, we will do so in a way that is modernising and reforming, but defends our Labour values and defends this country's values of an NHS that's free at the point of use, available to all, owned by all. What a contrast to our opponents in reform that would dismantle the NHS and replace it with an insurance system. And that's the values-based argument we need to take on to change our country and to see off reform at the next general election.
And just lastly, on reform, who are way ahead of you in the polls consistently, you talk of values. One of Reform's MPs, Sarah Pochin, has apologised after she said yesterday, it drives me mad when I see adverts full of black people, full of Asian people, full of people who are anything other than white. The Prime Minister told us a couple of weeks ago that some of Reform's plans are racist. Listening to that, do you think some of their politicians are too?
She's only sorry that she's been caught and called out, and she said the quiet bit loud. On Friday afternoon, I went to one of my local secondary schools listening to teenage boys aged between year 7, so around 11, right up to the age of 18, describe their experiences of racism in our capital city, in one of the most diverse cities on earth. And what they are describing and what we have seen on our streets in recent weeks and months is a return of 1970s, 1980s style racism that I thought we had left in the history books. And the only way we are going to defeat this racism is to call it out and confront it for what it is, and for the decent majority of this country to stand against it, as we have always done. I think what she said was a disgrace. I think it was racist, and the deafening silence from her party leader says it all. Reform is a party who think that our flag only belongs to some of us who look like me, not all of us who have built this country, built its success. And let's not forget, when we remember the service and the sacrifice with this poppy, that the people who bled and died for our democracy and our freedom weren't just my grandfather and my great-grandfather who looked like me and worshipped the same God as me. It was people from right across what was then the Empire, now the Commonwealth. People who are Muslim, people who are Sikh, people who are Hindu, people who look differently than you and I do. And we should remember that, defend it and fight for what this country stands for, a decent, respectful and inclusive democracy, the most successful multi-faith democracy in the world. We stand for that, Reform don't, and that's why they're not fit to govern.
OK, Wes Streeting, thank you very much indeed for coming in this morning. It's always good to have you with us in the studio. Thank you. Now, remember, as ever, we want to know what you think. There are a lot of very deep issues going on in this country at the moment. You can send us an email, kuenssberg@bbc.co.uk, or on social media, you can use the hashtag BBC Laura K. And you can message us on WhatsApp as well. The number is 08000 282 161. And if you haven't done so already, you can sign up for our newsletter, which miraculously can pop into your inbox every Thursday. And later in the programme, don't forget, we've got our interview with Kamala Harris, the former Vice President of the United States. But let's stick with UK politics. Chris Philp is the Conservatives' Shadow Home Secretary. Let's just start with what Wes Streeting was saying about the Reform UK MP Sarah Pochin's comments. Do you think she was being racist?
Well, it's certainly not language that I would use, and I don't think politicians should speak in those terms. Look, I'm not going to start throwing names around, but it's not language that I would have used. Look, I think the public
Sorry, Wes Streeting just said very clearly in his view that was racist.
Yeah, so
you say it was racist or not?
I'm not going to repeat. I'm not going to call her that word. It's not language. It's not language I would have used. But we should acknowledge the public do have concerns, legitimate concerns, about large-scale immigration that needs to be controlled, and discussing that certainly is not racist. But
do you agree with her that seeing adverts full of black people, full of Asian people on TV is something that ought not to be seen? That's
no, I don't agree with her. But I do think, and I wouldn't use that language.
But is it racist language? Sorry, it's a very straightforward question.
I'm not
say that?
I'm not calling her racist. No, but I do think there are legitimate concerns the public have about mass migration that need to be addressed.
And that's a separate point, but forgive me, I'm asking you a straightforward question. Is it racist?
I've answered it 3 times already.
Well,
no, it's not. I have not called her racist.
I'm not asking you to call an individual fellow MP racist. I'm asking you if, in your view, it is a racist sentiment to say, I don't like seeing black or Asian people on TV.
I don't think that's language that politicians should use.
OK, you've made it clear you're not going to say whether or not you believe that's a racist sentiment, and that's you're right in that way to answer that question. Let's talk then about your immigration plans as a party. Your colleague Katie Lamb this week used the phrase culturally coherent when talking about how the country would be different if lots of legal migrants left. What does culturally coherent mean?
Well, look, I think first of all we should acknowledge that immigration, as I just said a second ago, for quite a few years now has been far, far too high. And that is causing issues with integration. So let me give you some examples of what I mean by problems with integration. For example, according to the 2021 census, around 1 million people can't speak English at all or properly. Right, that is a problem. Workforce participation amongst some groups, some recent arrival groups, is extremely low. That is a problem as well. I don't think it's reasonable for British taxpayers, for example, to essentially subsidise people who have only arrived here recently. That's a problem. So I think we need to have a sense of national identity where people here feel allegiance and association primarily with the United Kingdom. Of course, we have our own other identities as well, maybe based on religion or other countries of origin. But I'd like to see everyone in this country feel allegiance and loyalty primarily to the United Kingdom. So those are the sort of things that I mean when I talk about integration. I suspect that was what Katie meant as well. OK, and in your plans for immigration that you published with a lot of fanfare at the party conference, and as the Shadow Home Secretary, you're the architect of your immigration plans. You say that people who have indefinite leave to remain, so they're living here legally, even though they're not British citizens, if they claim benefits, they might have to leave. Do you mean that anyone who claims benefits with indefinite leave to remain, aside from the state pension, would have to leave the country? Yes, so we updated our policy at the party conference. So anyone who comes here on a temporary work visa, if they become benefit dependent or earn below a certain level, should at the expiry of their temporary visa be required to leave, firstly. Secondly, we should be giving out far, far fewer visas to come into the country in the first place. Let me finish the point. I'm getting there, Laura. I'm working through each bit in turn.
OK, but we're short on time.
We'd like to have a binding cap on inward migration set at far, far lower levels than we have seen recently. We need to come out of the ECHR so we can remove all illegal immigrants within a week of arrival. It should be much harder and take longer to get indefinite leave to remain. And those people who do have indefinite leave to remain should not be able to claim benefits.
But if they have claimed benefits, would you get them to leave the country?
Well,
that's the question here.
So we've updated our policy at party conference.
And what is it? Should they have to leave the country if they've claimed benefits?
They should simply not be able to claim benefits at all. Okay. And that addresses the question of people who have come here who are not citizens but may be dependent on other taxpayers.
And it would not apply retrospectively?
So we would apply that to people who have ILR already, and we'd also apply the new higher thresholds to get ILR to people who are in the country but don't yet have it. So just to summarise, far fewer people coming in, only people coming in who are earning high wages, You only get indefinite leave to remain if you are making an economic contribution. No foreign citizen should be able to claim benefits, and anyone that enters this country illegally should be deported within a week. And to do that, we need to come out of the ECHR.
OK, thank you for clarifying. There's been a bit of confusion about the immigration policy this week. I also just want to ask you about this manhunt for Hadush Kebatu. Given that the prison service faced very significant cuts under Conservative administration, do you accept any responsibility for the shambles that the prison service has been in? Although I'm just going to tell you, because I'm just hearing in my ear, there are reports that he has been found. If we get any more details, of course, we'll bring that straight to viewers. But do you, as a prominent Conservative and former Home Office Minister, accept any responsibility for some of the shambles that you left behind in the justice system?
Well, if he has been found, that is very welcome. This disgraceful release happened under the watch of Labour ministers under David Lammy and Shabana Mahmood. Look, we left office with record ever numbers of police. It's this Labour government who have now been running the system for a year and a half. They allowed this dangerous paedophile to be released when he shouldn't have been. Frankly, he should be deported. And it's because Labour have lost control of our borders. This man is here in the first place. He crossed the channel illegally by small boat. And within just 8 days, he had sexually assaulted a young girl. Labour has lost control of our borders. And that is why despicable men like this are in the country assaulting 14-year-old girls. OK, Chris Philp, we must leave it there, but thank you very much. Always good to have you with us in the studio. And just to update you on that breaking news, we can tell you that Hadush Kebatu, who has been on the run for a couple of days, has indeed been arrested. We have just been hearing in the last few minutes. He was found in Finsbury Park in North London, and he was arrested at 8:30 this morning. That's all the information that we have for you right now, but if we learn more while we're still on air, we will certainly bring it to you to give you the very latest on that situation. So just to remind you of the news in the last few minutes, that the man who was released by accident on Friday has been arrested by police in North London this morning. Goodness me, it is a very busy morning for the news. We've had vigorous conversations with our two politicians here, and a bit later on we'll be hearing from Kamala Harris. But let's check in with our panel then. If we learn more about Hadush Kebatu's arrest after his release, we will bring that to people. But I just, first of all, Kay, how do you react to Wes Streeting there?
Can I just, before we get on to Wes Streeting, just hearing there from the opposition talking about how this has happened under Labour's watch. Daniel Khalifi, do you remember him? He disappeared in September of 2023, which was the previous government, as I recall, and he was strapped under a vehicle. He was on the run for a few days until he was run into the canal by an off-duty police officer on his bicycle. So I think both sides have got to accept responsibility. As far as Wes Streeting is concerned, it's a laudable role, isn't it, being Health Secretary? And I think he does it well. I think he accepts that the NHS needs reform, not just worship. But I think he sort of does that politician thing where he promises everything, including free chocolate on Fridays. And there's so much...
Sounds like a nice idea, doesn't it?
Yeah, there's so much to achieve. And I think there was sort of a certain level of naive optimism when this government took power. They said that they were going to sort out the doctor strike within 100 days. They did that. But they didn't. They expected, as a result of that, that the doctors would have a certain level of discipline. I don't think, given that there's going to be another strike in a couple of weeks' time or so, that that's necessarily the case. And I think he's got a big problem on his hands.
He gave, though, Marina, an incredibly forceful condemnation of the Reform politician Sarah Pochin, who has apologised for making remarks on a TV phone-in yesterday. And then Chris Philp, his Conservative who followed him, didn't then use the same kind of language. What did you make of that?
Well, I thought the contrast was really very striking, and I applaud Wes Streeting for being robust about it. And, by implication, I would say the opposite for the Conservative politician there. I think we do need to say those things quite clearly. I also think that Chris Philp slightly sort of mangled the, what was about race and what is about high levels of immigration. And I don't think that does anyone a service.
Do you think that the sort of lack of specificity, lack of being specific,
specificity,
yeah, lack of clarity about exactly what you're meaning? If you talk about things like cultural coherence, do you think that's a problem?
Well, I think cultural coherence is meaning something very different to what he was willing to recognise. I think it is meaning something about being white and about not being white.
Mike, listening to our politicians grapple with this, what's your impression of that?
Well, look, I mean, it's on both of those politicians used the same kind of sort of vague language. I wrote down a few of the phrases from Wes Streeting: bold and values-driven agenda, radical and ambitious, modernizing and reforming. You know, it's and I think you did a yeoman's effort to try to push them to get more specific, but it's hard because politicians don't. You know, I mean, it's that's what politicians do when they really can't answer the question. They use that kind of language. Yeah.
I just want to interrupt for a sec because we do have a bit more information now about the arrest of Hadush Kibatu. He, of course, is the Ethiopian sex offender who sparked riots over the summer. He has been arrested this morning. We have a statement from the Metropolitan Police Commander, James Conway. He's been overseeing the operation to find him. He said this has been a diligent and a fast-paced investigation led by specialist officers from the Metropolitan Police, supported by Essex Police and the Transport Police. Information from members of the public led officers to Finsbury Park, that's in North London, and following a search, they located him. He was detained by the police, but will be returned to the custody of the prison service. The commander went on to say, "I'm extremely grateful to the public for their support following our appeal." So it seems that a tip-off for the public has brought an end to that manhunt.
And credit where it's due for the Metropolitan Police. They get a good kicking a lot of the time, not least with the latest Panorama, which was a brilliant investigation by the BBC. But, you know, they found him quickly. Well done them.
We're just about to hear from Kamala Harris. So, Mike, you've covered the White House, covered Donald Trump for many, many years. Yesterday, we reported on an extract from the interview where she made it very clear she was interested in taking another run at the White House. Do you think that's wishful thinking on her behalf, or how would you see the Democrats responding to that?
Look, I think there will be a very robust debate and campaign inside the Democratic Party for who would run this next time. And if she decides to throw her hat in that ring, that's her choice. I think that the challenge for her is that the very short campaign that she ran this last time around, you know, she really never was able to do two things. She didn't distance herself from Biden, and she didn't really offer the public a cohesive description of what she stood for, separate and apart from that administration. Now, you know, that could be because she didn't have a lot of time to do it, and maybe she would do that in a more wholesome, more fulsome way this next time around. But I think that would be her challenge.
Okay, well, let's hear from her at length then, because it's only this time last year, although it feels like another lifetime. America was about to choose between the likely turbulence of Donald Trump 2.0 or promote the sitting Vice President, Kamala Harris, to the top job. As Mike was just saying, her candidacy only came about at the very last minute after months of concern about the health of President Biden. In the end, that saw a sharp exit from him. She lost, but does she still harbour that ambition to win? And should she have tried to force Biden out earlier on? She's just published her memoir of the 107-day campaign, and I sat down with her earlier this week.
You tell this roller coaster story of the 107 days of your campaign, and it's a rollicking read. I've read it 3 times.
No kidding.
Yeah, because it's almost like a thriller. But it's clear you don't think losing the election was all your fault. So, Madam Vice President, you say you'd underestimated the public's dislike of a frail 81-year-old running again. Do you feel that President Biden and his team torpedoed your chances of a fair chance at winning the election?
Well, as I've written, the buck stops with me in terms of my campaign. It always did, and I take full responsibility for what I did, and that's part of why I wrote the book, is to talk about the reflections that I've had on those 107 days, what I thought were strengths, but what I also thought could have been better. And you know, I wrote the book for many reasons, and primarily, this election in the U.S. was unprecedented. We had a president of the United States running for re-election and decides not to run 3.5 months before the election. The sitting vice president then takes up the mantle, running against a former president of the United States who had been running for 10 years, with 107 days to go. On behalf of everyone whose story could only be written in the greatest nation on earth, I accept your nomination to be President of the United States of It is important to also note that it turned out to be the closest presidential election in the 21st century in the United States. And it was important to me to write this book because it is a part of American history. And I was absolutely intent on making sure my voice would be present when history reflects those 107 days.
The reason that you ended up in that situation, and you say very clearly in the book, essentially you didn't have time. You didn't have time to make the campaign your own. You didn't have time to show the public what you could believe you could really do. And you also say President Biden pulling out should not have been a choice for an individual ego or an individual's ambition. Do you feel that you were deliberately kept in the dark about what was going on and how much he was struggling behind the scenes?
What I have written is what I believe, which is, one, we needed more time. There's no question about that. Two, there were many factors that contributed to the outcome of that election. But being mindful of the fact that there were extraordinary people who were involved in those 107 days in building up an inordinate amount for the time that we had, enthusiasm and, dare I say, joy around the possibility for our country.
And that comes across, but the context here, I think, at this historical moment you talk about is so important because there had been months of speculation around the world, here in the UK too, even in April, long before President Biden pulled out. We asked Nancy Pelosi what was going wrong. This was a huge subject of discussion. And you write that President Biden didn't raise his frailty with you, and you write that you didn't really raise it with him. That's extraordinary to read in your account.
Well, let's be more precise. There is a very serious difference between capacity to be president of the United States and the capacity to run for president of the United States. And so it is on that latter piece that I talk about in the book, about my concern about his ability with the level of endurance, energy that it requires, especially running against now the current president.
The total initiative relative to what we can do with more Border Patrol and more asylum officers.
President Trump?
I really don't know what he said at the end of that sentence. I don't think he knows what he said either.
So that is what I speak of in the book. And you rightly point out that I, in reflection, realize that, and I ask, was it on my behalf grace or recklessness to not raise the point with him about whether it was right for him to run? But let's be clear, my question was never about his capacity to be president.
But isn't it a strange message to the public to say, you know what, you need to be tougher and more able to run a political campaign than actually to be the person behind the desk in the Oval Office, to be the person making decisions in the Situation Room? So did you just not think it was that bad, or did you feel you just couldn't raise it?
I was concerned about his ability to run for re-election, given what the campaign would require, and requires of any individual, regardless of their age, and to run while being the sitting president of the United States with all of the responsibilities that that requires.
There's a lot of very well-respected reporting now in the United States that uses phrases like cover-up, that talks about widespread concerns. And you yourself say in the book, it shouldn't have been a choice for an individual's ego.
I do reflect on whether I should have had a conversation with him, urging him not to run for re-election because of what that would require, and given the stakes, most importantly. Because, as you know, I predicted just about everything that has now happened since the election.
And we'll come to that.
And so my concern, and especially on reflection, is should I have actually raised it? But as I've also written, part of the issue there was that it would it have actually been an effective and productive conversation, given what would otherwise appear to be my self-interest.
You say you've reflected on whether you wish you'd had that conversation with President Biden, urging him to pull out. In the end, it took other people's voices, and even George Clooney writing an article in a newspaper saying it was time to pull the plug. Is it your belief that you would now be president if Joe Biden had pulled out earlier?
I can't speculate about that. I do know we needed more time, that I'm sure of.
But if you needed more time, you might have won, and you might therefore be president right now if he had pulled out earlier.
That's speculation.
Well, that's the logic of what you're saying. You're saying if you'd had more time, you might have won.
I can't predict what the outcome would have been, but I am certain we needed more time, 107 days, to run for president of the United States against a former president of the United States in this political environment, with, as I also have written, the vast amount of mis and disinformation, the need to actually speak with a nation of 330 million people about not only who I am, but what I stood for in terms of the policies that I do believe actually are very salient and address the highest priorities of the American people. 107 days was clearly not enough time to do all of that.
And what leaps off every page is you threw yourself into those 107 days.
Indeed I did. And my team did too. I have an extraordinary team. In fact, I've dedicated my book to my team. From the first day I got the call from President Biden on a Sunday afternoon while I was in my sweats with a ponytail, having made pancakes and bacon and sausages for my baby nieces. Yeah. From that day and that afternoon when they all showed up, half of us had been working out and not had even a shower. And for those 107 days, they worked around the clock and left everything on the table, everything on the field.
And when it comes to your campaign, you've already said the buck stops with you.
Indeed.
You had massively successful rallies, you had a crazy number of celebrity endorsements, you had Oprah Winfrey turning out for you, you had Taylor Swift backing you. But there's little in the book about why you feel you didn't connect with ordinary voters, those people in the middle who could have gone either way. And indeed, during the campaign, Gen Z and Latinos in some numbers moved across to Trump. You stayed in your comfort zone, didn't you? That was the Democrats' problem.
I received 75 million votes from a variety of people.
But in the Electoral College, you were far outdone.
I'm not finished. I received 75 million votes from people around the nation of every stripe, whether it be geographic location, race, gender, and age. And it is true, however, and I also reflect and write on that for probably a decade, Democrats have been losing certain sectors of society, and there's work that we need to get done. One of the reasons that I ran on the issue of child care, of Medicare, basically a health coverage for home health care for people, for example, who are raising young children and taking care of their parents. One of the reasons I ran on a perspective that we need to make housing more affordable. So I was offering a $25,000 down credit for first-time home buyers. I ran on an agenda that was about going after price gouging, corporations taking advantage of working people.
But why didn't it connect with working people?
Well, it did connect with working people, but clearly there was more work to be done.
But why?
Because we needed more time to talk with more people, and we have to understand the context, which is that if you look at the trends that had been in play probably at least since, if not before, 2016, you were seeing for the Democratic Party that there was a shift taking place among the demographics you have mentioned. And that's work that needs to be done, and that's work that I and others are working on to remind people that it has always been the Democratic Party that has stood for working people. And the work we need to do going forward is also, frankly, to provide the contrast, because right now we have a president in the Oval Office who is building a ballroom for his rich friends while he is depriving working people of health care during this government shutdown period.
Let's talk then about that. Mm-hmm. There's an evocative moment in the book where you realize you've lost and you say, my God, what will happen to our country?
Yeah.
And as you've mentioned, the Trump administration is pulling down the East Wing of the White House. They're turning many conventions on their head. There's a shutdown in the federal government. In the campaign, you said Donald Trump was a fascist. Do you think he's running a fascist authoritarian government?
I was asked if he was a fascist, and I said yes. And the reason is that I look at what is happening right now. And again, it is what I predicted. He said he would weaponize the Department of Justice. He has done exactly that. He has used the United States Department of Justice, which should be an independent agency that makes decisions based on fact and law and not personal vengeance of the President of the United States. But this is how he has conducted himself, so much so that recently he has dared to suggest that the United States Department of Justice, which is an agency of the people of America, funded by their tax dollars, should give him 200 and X number of $million because of a prosecution and an investigation that he rightly deserved. You look at what has happened in terms of how he has weaponized, for example, the federal agencies around going after political satirists who his skin is so thin, he couldn't endure criticism from a joke and attempted to shut down an entire media organization in the process.
And you are critical of billionaires and other institutions bowing down, capitulation.
There are not all, but there are many that have capitulated since day one, who are bending the knee at the foot of a tyrant, I believe for many reasons, including they want to be next to power, because they want to perhaps have a merger approved or avoid an investigation. And it is a crying shame that when push comes to shove, we can't count on the titans of industry to at least posture in a way that is about maintaining the guardrails around a democracy and democratic systems.
What then of foreign leaders? I just wonder, what did you feel when you heard that Keir Starmer had presented an invitation from the King to Donald Trump in the view of the world's media, in the guilt of the Oval Office? Did you think that was cheesy, or did it make you feel queasy, or was it obsequious? You know, is there a risk that foreign leaders are being played by Donald Trump because they have to show they're close to power?
I do believe that Donald Trump, as I said on the debate stage before the election, and I maintain it to be true, he has shown his very nature. In the foreign stage, he has proven over a long period of time that he invites favor and flattery. And what I said on the debate stage, like everything else I said and predicted, continues to be true.
So you would make that warning to foreign leaders to be careful what they wish for by getting too close, perhaps?
Foreign leaders will do as they think is right for their country.
And yet, Donald Trump has made progress of a sorts in the Middle East that President Biden and you, I know you worked hard on this, failed to make. Do you praise the achievements he's made in terms of seeming to move the Gaza-Israel conflict towards resolution?
Listen, I think that, first of all, I'm very, very happy that we now have a situation where the hostages are out. There's still more work to be done. I think credit should be given where credit is due, whether it be Egypt, Qatar, or this administration and this president. There is good work that happened, but there's a whole lot more to do. And as you can see, when we're talking about, in particular, one, the fragility of the ceasefire, two, equally important, and something I've been working on since October 8th, what is the plan for the day after, which includes the security, the governance, and the rebuilding of Gaza.
Let's talk then about what's next for you, and also what's changed in your life since then. Donald Trump stripped you of your Secret Service protection at a time when there had been attempts on his life. Of course, there have been other political killings in the US, most notably recently the killing of Charlie Kirk. Has Donald Trump's decision put you in danger?
I feel safe.
Why do you think he did it?
You'll have to ask him.
Well, you must have thought about it.
You have to ask him. I don't pretend to know why people do what they do on a daily basis.
In terms then of what is next for you, you write very powerfully about the differences that many women have made to your life, whether that was your meeting with Angela Merkel or the experience of growing up with your extraordinary mother or the stories of your baby nieces, Amara and Leela. When are they going to see a woman in charge in the White House?
In their lifetime, for sure.
Could it be you?
Possibly.
Have you made a decision yet?
No, I have not.
What about running again as someone else's vice president, or maybe being part of another ticket? If Gavin Newsom, your fellow Californian, said, hey, come and be my Secretary of State, would you consider that?
Right now, I'm focused on my book tour. And I'm glad to know that you read it 3 times.
I did. I read it 3 times because it's a great read.
Thank you.
But you say in your book, I'm not done.
That is correct. I am not done. I have lived my entire career a life of service. And it's in my bones. And there are many ways to serve. I've not decided yet what I will do in the future beyond what I am doing right now, which is meeting with many people. Obviously, right now I'm in the UK, but otherwise I've been spending a lot of time in our country. Most recently, I was spending an incredible amount of time in the South. I was in Georgia, North Carolina, and Alabama, and talking with people and mostly listening, and I'm enjoying doing that. I think that people want to be heard right now. And one of the reasons that I decided not to run for governor of California, I want to listen to people without it being transactional, without asking people for their vote, but listening to them. I think the American people have a lot to say right now.
But you've been very clear that it's a possibility you might run again to become president. And in my experience interviewing politicians, when someone says, I'm not done, it means they are thinking seriously about running. But when you look at the bookies' odds, they put you as an outsider, even behind Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. I mean, is that underestimating you?
I think there are all kinds of polls that will tell you a variety of things. I've never listened to polls. If I listened to polls, I would have not run for my first office or my second office, and I certainly wouldn't be sitting here in this interview.
So your message to supporters at the end of the book was, we fought, if you fight, you win. You fought and you lost, but next time...
No, my message is, as you would have read in the last few chapters, was yes, I do believe that when you fight, you win, but sometimes the fight takes a while. That was my message.
While I concede this election, I do not concede the fight that fueled this campaign.
Let's close with a couple of fun things, if I can squeeze them
Sure.
in. Because one of the things that also comes across in the book is part of maybe the showbiz side of campaigning. You obviously enjoy it, and meeting musicians and creative people and coming across...
And people who, you might, I think the challenge is you recognize the famous names, so you're speaking of them. But there were millions of people that you wouldn't recognize their name, who I met with, who gave me an incredible amount of joy, and really continue to give me a sense of confidence in who the American people are, and their optimism, and their fight, and their endurance, and their love of country.
Is Kamala still brat?
I think we're going to have to ask that beautiful artist who said it over a year ago.
Maybe we'll ask Charlie XCX.
Yes.
What do you miss most about being vice president?
I worked with wonderful people, and that was great. The work that I do because I want to solve problems, and there was good work to be had.
And what do you miss the least?
I don't know. These are high-class problems to talk about things like that, you know?
Madam Vice President, thank you so much for giving us your time today.
I'm glad to be with you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, we'll talk about that in just a second. But while we've been on air, the migrant who was released in error from prison on Friday has been found this morning in North London after a 2-day manhunt. Metropolitan Police officers arrested Hadish Kabatu at 8:30 this morning in North London in the Finsbury Park area. He'll be returned to custody. He was sentenced last month for sexually assaulting a 14-year-old girl and a woman in Epping while living in an asylum hotel. And the Cabinet Minister, Wes Streeting, said he'll now be deported and thanked the public for their help in finding him. And there'll be more coverage of that across the BBC, of course, today. Let's, though, just get a quick reaction from our panel to that interview. Well, Kay, you were huffing and puffing while we were watching that here in the studio. Why?
Three quick thoughts on that. She's colder than a winter's night in Wigan, isn't she? I don't know what she was like off camera, but oh my goodness me. I've interviewed Hillary Clinton many times, including when she lost so meteorically, and also about Monica Lewinsky. And she was much more forthcoming in her interviews. And the other thought, when she kept saying, I needed more time, if she can't be assertive to a frail old man, you know, what is she against somebody like Putin?
Well, it was interesting. So, Mike, I kept thinking of that Beverly Knight song, you know, coulda, woulda, shoulda. She sort of does say, oh, maybe I should have raised it. I did think about it. And I don't think she's been quite as candid about that before. A real regret there.
Yeah, real regret. But watching it, I found myself very frustrated because myself, as a reporter covering that entire administration, our paper, other news institutions, pushed on the question of the president's frailty and whether he was fit, frankly, to govern for more than a year before that disastrous debate that sort of sparked everything. And were repeatedly told by the people in his very tight orbit that it was fine. And we later come to find out that there were lots of other people, Democrats, Hollywood people, who were repeatedly pushing too. So this idea, this notion that she didn't know whether she should have that conversation it just doesn't ring true to me, given that she was right with him.
Do you think she's misrepresenting that, or do you think that they were at pains to hide it from her?
Oh, I don't know. I don't know. I mean, the thing is, that's true. We could see it from afar. She was much closer to him. It's hard to understand or imagine that she couldn't see that. It's really just a question of, you know, what was her decision process, and you know, she clearly made a decision not to say anything.
Now, Marina, the relationship with America, we know this Prime Minister has worked very hard at trying to kind of reset, but he's also been trying to reset our relationship with Europe. And you have, maybe he should read it, you've written a book all about how we should rebuild our relationship with Europe, even though you were a convinced leaver and you still believe that leaving the EU was the right thing to do. Is Keir Starmer having to clear up the mess that Brexiteers made?
I think Keir Starmer's got the wrong sort of attitude now. If it's true that we're about to see a sort of blaming of current economic woes on Brexit and so on, I think that's really the wrong way to go forward. I thought that he had, leaving aside everything in the referendum, had reached a point of, or I think we need to be, which is of looking forward and being constructive about it and not reopening old arguments. And I think there's a lot of things that are happening now, really positive things that Britain should feel confident about, you know, doing things differently, that we're able to be, you know, as a sovereign nation, take choices of our own and lead.
One of the things that you do professionally is you're a mediator, and this relationship has been very difficult between the UK and the EU, although it has moved on a lot in the last 18 months or so. So what would be maybe at the top of your list to kind of fix next, if you like?
I think it is to have your eyes on the future, first of all. And I think that also means trying to find, and this is very much a mediation sort of theme, but try and find genuine respect for difference. So we here in the UK have chosen through a democratic process to come out of the EU, not to merge our political institutions, and to be a sovereign nation and take decisions ourselves. I think the EU needs to respect that. And I think equally we need to see, we need to stop apologising, and this comes back to Keir, stop apologising for the decision that collectively as a nation we took in 2016 and embrace it.
And having a close relationship even after a breakup is something you know a bit about, if I dare say. A lot of our viewers will be wondering what it was like to have been alongside Boris Johnson at the peak of some of our most chaotic political years.
You used the term close relationship. I didn't. But being alongside, I mean, it was fantastic to see. Thank you so much. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, who's not going to find it interesting being, you know, right in the middle of a place where important decisions are being taken? But even at the lower level, I mean, and since I get my 10 cents worth in about Kamala Harris...
In your 10 seconds.
10 seconds. Being there on the streets, also seeing how people react to a politician and what real connection is, does matter too.
OK. All right, we must leave it there. I know we could have talked about a lot more with all three of you, but thank you so much for being with us this morning. Thank you to my trio at the desk and to all of our guests today. And, of course, most of all, to you for spending your Sunday morning with us. The full version of our interview with Kamala Harris is on iPlayer, YouTube and BBC Sounds, and later I'll be there with Paddy O'Connell on Sunday's episode of Newscast. And of course, I'll look forward to seeing you next Sunday, same time, same place.